Perfect. When the angel of death comes to take our souls, it's reported from the Prophet ﷺ that if it's a pure soul, they will come gently and they will extract the soul from the body. They will sit at the head of that person who's passing away. Now think about, I'm sure we've all had instances where we have lost relatives in our lives. So think about how that might look like for ourselves when this may happen. Because death is the most certain thing that's going to happen in our lives. There's no question about that. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, in reality. So the Prophet ﷺ informs us that the angels will come, sit at the head of that person. And if it's a pure soul, they will say nice, affirming words to that soul. And extracting that soul from the body will be like a drop of water. So it'll be a very gentle experience for the person. And they will be taken up into the seven heavens. And they, as they pass through the angels, and they're taken up to register that soul. Will that soul be registered as a believer? Or will this soul be registered as from the people of hellfire? And as they're taking the soul, as they're passing through other angels will make comments of what a beautiful smell, what a beautiful person, what a beautiful spirit, right? And then they'll be taken up, registered as a believer, and then brought down onto the earth. And I'm summarizing a very long hadith here. So when they're brought back down to the earth, the angels will question this person. Who is your Lord? Right? Ma dinuk, what's your religion? Right? And who's your prophet? And who's this man that was sent to you? And this person will pass with flying colors that Allah is my Lord, Islam is my Deen, and the person that was sent to me was Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he believed in. And upon him answering that question, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will basically command the angels, write the record of my servant in the righteous register, right? So your heavenly announcement will be made that my servant has spoken the truth, spread out the carpets for him in paradise, hold him for paradise, and open a gate for him to paradise, basically from the grave itself. Its comforts and fragrances will come to him, and his grave will become spacious as far as his eye can see. And then a handsome man will come to him. And this person will be wondering, who are you? Who is this person? Very good looking, very handsome. And this handsome man will respond saying, I am your good deeds. I am your righteous deeds. In the same hadith, the Prophet ﷺ gives us a contrast of someone who was a wicked soul, someone who wasn't a believer on this earth, that when the angels come to him in his final moments to take his soul, it will be a very rough experience for him. And the way they explain, the hadith goes to explain, is that it will be like pulling out wet wool from a tweezer or from like a skewer. So very rough, very thorny experience. And as they're taking the soul up to the seven heavens, the angels that they pass through will be commenting, what a wicked soul, what a foul smell this soul has. And they'll be registered among the people of the hellfire. And when they return back to earth, the two angels will question him in his grave. Who is your Lord? He's not going to know. What's your religion? He's not going to know. Who is this person that was sent to you? He's not going to know. He's going to say, oh, I heard some people saying kada wa kada, saying this and that, X, Y, Z. And then that soul will be beaten. And that soul will be doomed for hellfire. And the person that approaches him at that point is a person that looks very foul and wicked. He'll be scared of this person approaching him. And he'll be asking this person, who are you? What are you? And this person will say, I am your wicked deeds. The first person, as the hadith mentions, will ask Allah, oh Allah, begin the day of resurrection, begin the Yawm al-Qiyamah. May Allah make us among those. Ameen. So that person will ask, oh Allah, begin the Yawm al-Qiyamah so I can be reunited with my family. And the second soul will be asking, the wicked soul, that, oh Allah, make the Yawm al-Qiyamah never appear. Right? He's already in a bad situation. But he knows what's coming is much worse. This is why this question matters. right? When I was growing up, and you guys as you're growing up and passing through university, it's a pretty fair statement to say that this is not a question most people are worried about, right? Whether it's in our non-Muslim crowd, whether it's in our Muslim crowd. Alhamdulillah, that to be able to even realize that this is a question that I need to think about is a blessing in and of itself. And hence this question really matters. And as we go through this talk, I want to kind of highlight and start with the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, we see that Allah showed him, Allah basically gave him a very smart, intellectual mind at a very young age, right? And we see that when Allah says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, وكذلك نري إبراهيم ملكوت السماوات والأرض وليكون من الموقنين. That we showed Ibrahim the wonders of the heavens and the earth so he could be sure in faith. He had yaqeen, so he had the ability to argue his case, to debate. And how does he debate? Ibrahim alayhi salam was, the people around him, they were really into stars and the moon and the sun, all these kind of things. So he debates them. So he debates them in a manner they understand, right? So what does he do? Allah says in the Quran, فَلَمَّا جَنَّ عليه الليل رأى كوكبا قال هذا ربي فلما أفل قال لا أحب الآفلين. That he basically points to the stars and he says that this is my Lord, right? And this is what scholars believe, that Ibrahim alayhi salam always had iman, right? He wasn't on a self-discovery of any sort. He wanted to show his people through reasoning, right? As if he is in a self-discovery journey. So he's pointing to the stars and he says, I believe this is my Lord. And when the star disappears, right, at nighttime goes, it's daytime, he says, well, the star just left. How can that be my Lord? Because if it's my Lord, if something is to be a Lord, it has to be constant. It cannot be, right? It can't just disappear. So then he does what? He says, فَلَمَّا رَأَى الْقَمَرَ بَازِغًا قَالَ هَذَا رَبِّي. So when he sees the moon, he tells them, this is my Lord. What happens? The moon also disappears. فَلَمَّا أَفَلَ قَالَ لَإِن لَمْ يَهْدِنِي رَبِّي لَأَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْقَوْمِ الضَّالِّينَ. When the moon disappears as well, right? He says, that cannot be my Lord. If it was, why is it disappearing? And then the last example he brings is that he looks at the sun. فَلَمَّا رَأَى الشَّمْسَ بَازِغَةً قَالَ هَذَا رَبِّي هَذَا أَكْبَرُ فَلَمَّا أَفَلَتْ قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ إِنِّي بَرِيءٌ مِّمَّا تُشْرِكُونَ. When the sun goes away, he says, right? When the sun sets, he said, the sun cannot be my Lord. And then he says, oh my people, I totally reject what you associate with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? I believe in Allah alone. إِنِّي وَجَّهْتُ وَجْهِي لِلَّذِي فَطَرَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ حَنِيفًا وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. That I face towards the one and true Lord who originated, who created the heavens and the earth, and I'm steadfast and not one of the polytheists. And then we see in the Quran, we see in Surah Maryam, along with other surahs as well, where there's a battle that happens, right? Ibrahim alayhi salam is trying to explain to his father that, oh my father, why is it that you don't touch it? Okay. Okay. So Ibrahim alayhi salam goes through a process of trying to explain to his father, right? We know the story. His father is very harsh against him, right? And he says that if you were to not change your ways, then he threatens him that there's going to be consequences. And then he tries to do that with his people. There's consequences. There's threats coming to his way. So what does he do? One of these days, he decides that he's going to show them a lesson. So he breaks the idols, right? As Allah says in the Quran, Ibrahim alayhi salam says, وَاللَّهِ لَأَكِيدَنَّ أَصْنَامَكُمْ بَعْدَ أَنْ تُوَلُّوا مُدْبِرِينَ. That when they turn away, when they turn their backs, when they're not looking, I'm going to break these idols. So that's what he does. He says, فَجَعَلَهُمْ جُدَدًا إلا كبيرا لهم لعلهم إليه يرجعون. Uh, so he basically smashes them into pieces, except for he leaves that one big one, right? We'll come back to this point when we talk about Surah Al-Ikhlas shortly, except for the one big one. So then when they come back, what happens? They're in shock. Who did this to our, right? I mean, look at the messaging, like who dared to do this to our gods, right? Man fa'ala hada bi alihatina. Who did this to our gods? Just the question alone is like a contradictory statement, because how does that even make any sense, right? Okay, so Ibrahim alayhi salam says what? He says the biggest one did it, right? The one. So قالوا سمعنا فتى يذكرهم يقال له إبراهيم قالوا فأتوا به على أعين الناس لعلهم يشهدون. So who did it? They say, we heard a boy doing it. We heard that a boy did it. So bring the boy in front of the people. So they ask him, was it you, O Ibrahim, that you did it? You're the one who broke the idols. What did he say? قال بل فعله كبيرهم هذا فاسألوهم إن كانوا ينطقون. The biggest one did it. The biggest idol broke the rest of the idols. And if you are in any doubt, ask the biggest one, right? You'll get your answer. And what happens from there? فَرَجَعُوا إِلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ فَقَالُوا إِنَّكُمْ أَنْتُمَ الظَّالِمُونَ. Right? That you guys are all, so they came to their senses that you guys are the wrongdoers. And then it's a bit of a long story, but they basically are shocked by Ibrahim alayhi salam's statement that what you're telling us to ask the biggest idol who broke the other ones, like, are you crazy, right? And Ibrahim alayhi salam is basically telling them, yeah, that's exactly the point that I'm trying to make. What do they end up doing? They end up throwing him to the fire, right? And we all know the story. Allah told the fire to that be peaceful and be cold. And the fire was cold. Any questions so far? Okay. So we'll jump into Surah Al-Ikhlas. And this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself is telling us about himself. Right? قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. Right? O Prophet. Now, you can see how the translation and a lot of the translations today would say, O Prophet, He is Allah, the One. Has anyone seen any other translations of this ayah? No? Okay. So one of the earliest ways that scholars understood this verse to be that after Qul, the word huwa, right? If anyone knows Arabic, if you read it normally, it seems like He is Allah the One, correct? Okay. Now, a lot of scholars say, actually that's a stronger opinion, that huwa here is something called dhamir shah, and it's used to bring attention to something. I.e., the sentence here is not He is Allah the One. The sentence is Allah is one. So Qul, say, huwa, pay attention, Allahu ahad. Allah is one. Now, different groups have categorized this whole idea of oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in different ways. And they actually kind of they don't contradict each other. They kind of complement each other, except in certain other instances. But I wanted to bring all of them together. So one group categorized Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as in His oneness and His lordship, that you accept that Allah is the Lord, only Lord, there's no other one. And you accept Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His worship, that you only worship Him alone. And that He is one in His names and attributes. He's unique, right? Another group categorized it, and when it comes to categorizations, it kind of looks like this. You guys are sitting on my right side, you guys are sitting on my left side, right? It's about perspective. So you're looking at me from my right perspective. You guys are looking at me from my left perspective. What you may notice might slightly be different than what you may notice. But your perspective is not invalid in front of you, and your perspective is not necessarily invalid in front of you, right? So in Arabic, we call this i'tibar, that something you can study a problem from many different ways, right? And you can categorize it from many different ways, right? Whether that categorization is correct or not, that's a different issue, right? But you can look at it from a different way, certain different ways, and try to investigate in a situation. The oneness in his being okay, so the oneness in his being, when we say Allahu Ahad, what does that entail? That's it, he's one. There's nothing more to that? Yeah. So we'll come to that, he's unique. Lam yakun lahu kufuwan ahad, right? There's nothing like him. Or laysa kamithlihi shay, there's nothing like him. But when we say oneness, what is oneness? Is there more to this oneness? No one? Anyone from the sister side? Yes? He doesn't have any partners, correct? True. But it also means he is one being. Right? Like we have many parts to ourselves. Right? Allah is one being. Why is that important? Because if you look at Allah's oneness, right? Him being one being, right? And the fact that his power is him alone, right? When we say that he is the only one who la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, right? We recite this every now and then. That there's no power and no might except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, how many of you have friends or maybe colleagues who are from the Hindu religion? Nobody? Okay. Fair bit. What's the belief in the Hindu religion? That there's all these gods, and what happens? Are they really the ultimate gods? No. So it goes back to what? Essentially, it's going back to one, correct? So there's a division of power, right? There's a division of power, there's a division of responsibilities. Oneness of Allah that we believe in, that means that there's no division of power, right? There's no division of responsibilities. And when we say oneness in being, we also negate that there's a piece of, right? Like, excuse my language here because we're in the studious environment here, so we can kind of talk like this. There's no piece of lordship that can be transferred over. What does that mean? That means no one can be coming and walking on earth saying, I am the son of God, right? Or I'm the daughter of God, or whatever. So Allah is one in his being. He is one in his actions, right? What does that mean, he's one in his actions? Like, am I not moving this? So how does that work out? Yes. So when we say la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, isn't there a contradiction because now I'm moving this? Correct. So you're saying, so who's moving it then? Am I moving it? Or? Okay. So most of the Sunni scholarship, actually majority of the Sunni scholarship, believe that when I'm moving this, I'm only intending to move it. I'm only bringing causes together. Causes, right? I'm intending to move my hands, right? Allah is the one that's allowing the action to happen, i.e., He is the doer, right? But am I still responsible for my actions? I'm still responsible for my actions because I'm intending it. I'm trying to bring together the causes, right? It's through Allah's power that I'm doing it. So, hence, oneness in Allah's actions, right? To the true meaning of La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. And then when we talk about names and attributes, right? There's nothing like him in his names, in his attributes, anything like him. So even if something, and this is all of our Sunni scholarship and is an agreement of this, that anything we say that might even give us an indication that, oh, well, I can be merciful too, but Allah is merciful. It's already understood that Allah's mercy and your mercy is not even the same type of thing. Like, right? It's not even the same construct. It's not even the same thing in essence. So there's complete oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah even gives us in the Quran examples of what? لو كان فيهما آلهة إلا الله لفسدتا. That if had there been in the heavens and the earth any God besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then there will be total chaos. Right? And subhanAllah, that you even see that in the Hindu religion too. Like it's almost like even religions that are preaching otherwise, they have conceded to that fact. So everything goes back to still one being, right? Because otherwise it falls apart, right? If you have a God, right? And then if you try to say there's another God, you're never going to be able to prove that they're equal. Can you? No. Because if A wants to do something and B doesn't, who is really in charge here, right? If A is able to do it, if you say A has the final agreement or the final call, then B is not God. If you say otherwise, then A is not God. Now, what if you come and say, okay, well, what if they're always in agreement? How would you counter that point? Like Zoroastrians, they believe in two gods, right? The god of the evil, god of the of good, right? So they're not identical. They're saying one is of evil, one is of, but they still say the evil one's a god too. Okay. If there's always agreement, then there's no need for the wrong. But okay, we're going somewhere with this. Cool. But here's my question: if they're both in agreement, who's doing the action? Right? Because the moment one of them does the action, the other one cannot do the same action, correct? So me and Abshir can both run towards the door and open the door. But once he opens the door is already open, right? So in that case, really, if there's agreement, both of them are not gods, right? Both of them are not gods. I mean, absolutely, in Surah Al-Ikhlas, Allahu Samad, right? That He is the one that every single thing depends on, and He is not in need for anything else or anyone else. That His existence is a necessity. But our existence is not. Our existence is dependent. Right? Any questions? There's an example that gets mentioned quite a bit in Hamza Zorses mentioned this quite a bit. Am I ringing any bells? Divine reality? No. So the example that he gives is that because when you try to sometimes talk about how Allahu lam yalid wa lam yulad, right? Right? Who created? A question that comes with like, who created Allah? You said, well, that frame of reasoning will never make sense if you go there because you're going to keep going there, right? So it's kind of like asking, can I borrow $5, right? And you're asking your friend, well, I have to ask my friend, and I have to ask my friend, and this keeps going. Sorry, infinite regress will never happen. So if we keep asking the question, well, who created Allah? Well, whoever created this being cannot be God, then if you keep going, and the very fact that we are living in a real present time, we cannot go backwards in infinity forever. Right? The very fact that present exists, that means there had to have been a beginning. Right? Unless you claim that we're living in a matrix, then that's a different argument that needs to be dealt with. Because we argue that we are living in a reality, not in a matrix, right? If someone operates that under the condition that we're living in a matrix, then this is a different argument that needs to happen. Cool. No, I did. Okay. Lam yalid wa lam yulad. He never had offspring, nor was he born. He was never created, right? He always existed. What's the problem with groups claiming that he had an offspring, or it's possible to have, for God to have an offspring? Yes. Okay. Okay. So what is stopping someone from saying that I don't believe that having an offspring is a negative thing, or is a sign of imperfection? They'll be like, okay, well, it could be a sign of perfection, if anything, because on Earth, someone who can't have kids is not seen as someone perfect. They'll say, well, he didn't need it. We're not saying he needed it. It happened. Yeah. How would you respond to that? Sisters? Yes. Fair point. Let's say the person you're arguing with says that, well, if he's God, then he doesn't need another being. He just produces it, isn't right? Isn't it kun fayakun, right? So yes. In what sense? The essence of oneness, yes, deteriorates. Now there's two beings, two entities. Okay. And they say, okay, well, isn't that what the Christians say, right? The three is still one because it's still one in essence. Okay, that's a good one. The powers are being distributed. Okay, cool. What else? True. So what's wrong with that? You're on the right track. Yeah. Why not? So do we believe Allah is inside creation? He's outside of time and space, right? So now if you say that, what the Christians say, right? Um, that means now there's a piece of God within creation, right? So if you say Jesus is within creation now, and he is a piece of God, or he has some divinity, are we now saying the universe is bigger than Jesus, who is partially God, i.e., the universe is bigger than God because now he's fitting into it? Well, you see what I'm trying to say, right? Like, we don't talk about size when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Because it doesn't apply. But if you were to play that game, now you have God within creation, right? And if you were to say he's walking around, Jesus, like whatever, he is not bigger than the mountains and the skies and the horizon and everything, right? So already there's a contradiction. That makes no sense. You were going to say something. Which is ungodly. Okay. So response will be what the sister said there. You are distributing power. The oneness is not there anymore. Right? So the question is, if God has an offspring, does the offspring not have divinity now because he's so then he's yeah, but then the whole idea of God having offspring, like he's gonna have divinity, right? He's gonna have divineness because of where he's coming from. Right? So there's distribution of power, distribution of being, and distribution of parts. Yeah. And the last verse in Surah Al-Ikhlas, what? وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. There's nothing comparable to him. Right? Any questions so far? No? Okay. And we also understand from Surah Al-Rahman that what? That Allah is one of the characteristics of Allah is al-baqa, that He is everlasting, ever living. Right? As Allah says in Surah Al-Rahman, كُلُّ مَنْ عَلَيْهَا فَانٍ, everything that exists on this earth will be fanning, as in will be destroyed, will be taken out. وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ ذُو الْجَلَالِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ, except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself with His majesty. So, with that having said, or with that discussed, can Allah do anything and everything? Yeah? Who says yeah? Everyone? Okay. You guys sure? Okay. So I'm gonna ask you guys the classic question that atheists use. Can God build a rock that He can lift? You guys all answered He can do anything and everything, correct? It was like agreement in this room. Can He build a rock that is too heavy for Him to lift? Yes. He can't? But can He? We're talking about ability. But He can. So you're saying He will not do something that contradicts his godliness, but we're asking about ability here. So he can't do it. He's unable to do it. Okay. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Okay. Anything with sisters? Yes. So he can. So he can create something that he cannot live. Okay. Okay. So your answer is kind of like a cop out because you're saying he wouldn't, but we're asking, well, can. So you can't answer that. You said he can, right? Okay. Okay. Yes. So God can create anything, everything. Yeah. So what's an example of a logical impossibility? Another one? Okay, so the one I really like is that question is essentially asking, because you're talking about an ability and then an inability, right? Which makes no sense. Like, because it's kind of like you're asking me, can God be God and then not be God? Right? Not being able to lift something is ungodly, right? But creating something heavy is godly, right? He can create whatever he wants. So you're basically asking, can God choose to not be God? Right? Can he choose to not be God? Now you're just answering that question, you're falling into that trap. Because the question doesn't make sense. Not every question needs an answer. Right? So is that clear? Okay. I think most of you were pretty much had the answer, or we're in the right track. If Allah is the doer of all actions, what about evil? Yes. Okay. So you're right. We need bad to recognize good. We need that contrast. Who's doing the bad? So when bad things happen on earth, we just said Allah is the source of all actions. So are we going to say that even the bad actions are coming from Allah? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Hmm. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. But we're talking about evil actions here. So like let's say you go to an ATM and then someone like robs you at gunpoint or something. And Allah protect you, right? And that never happened to anyone. That's an evil deed that happened, right? Who did it? Because we just talked about how la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, right? There's no power or might except with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So even when we intend to do something, Allah is the one doing the action, right? Right? And the way we kind of derive it is because we believe that things by themselves don't have the power to do anything. And we see that in the example of Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he's thrown in the fire, what happens? The fire, which generally burns, doesn't burn him in this case because Allah didn't want it to burn, right? So Allah is the one doing all the deeds. But what about the bad deed? Like this person just robbed someone. That's a bad deed. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. He's not the enforcer of it, so he's not doing the evil. Okay. So we're operating under the construct that there's no doer on earth except Allah. And we basically intend and we bring the conditions together for something to happen. Allah gives us the result, right? Now, I can bring conditions for an evil to happen. Allah still bringing the result. Now, can I say Allah is doing the evil? Yeah. Okay. Okay. And why does He allow that evil to happen? Yeah. We'll go with the brothers and then come back. Go ahead. Okay. So you're trying to say basically that there's no such thing as an absolute evil. That even if there's evil, that Allah still has hikmah behind it, and it might lead to some sort of. Right. Okay. Yeah. Some reason. Yeah. Okay. Now you brought up another point now. So good has no meaning without evil. Can we recognize good or evil before revelation or without revelation? You know how sometimes we hear we have universally common values? Do we really have universally common values without religion? Right? Let's say we're in a period where no religion exists. How do we recognize good and how do we recognize evil? Can we? Okay. Okay. Yes. Yeah. 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 Okay. So classically, we had the Mu'tazilis and the Sunnis have debated this issue. So the Mu'tazilis were of the opinion that you can actually recognize good and evil before revelation, right? That some things are inherently good, some things are inherently bad, right? Uh, most of Sunnis went in the lean towards the direction that without religion we cannot understand, we cannot have any moral compass whatsoever, because nothing is ever inherently good or inherently bad. It's only when Allah puts the values on these things, that's when something becomes inherently good. That's when something becomes good or something becomes bad. Um, I think the most simplest example is a man being allowed four wives, right? Uh, are you going to say there's no harm to three women when this happens? There's always harm in many different things, right? But they're still allowed for certain bigger goals, right? That's one of those, like I use that example because can you inherently, without religion, know if that's good or bad? Right? If anything, without religion, most of us would probably turn the other way, correct? That it's probably bad, right? Without religion, we have no idea if it's good or if it's permissible or if it's somewhere in the middle. And the last one's pretty obvious. Are we Muslims through blind faith? He says no. You're Muslim because you believe you're Muslim. Like you've gone on a journey and you've figured it out, and you know for sure Allah exists. And that's a good answer. That's the answer we're looking for. But I wish I could say that and say the answer at your age. But so what about people that just follow their parents? Are they not Muslims then? I don't know about that. We can look it up. That'd be good. Yeah. Go ahead. Of course. Yeah. So even if your parents were Muslim, I'm sure at some point you have thought about it in some way, in the most least convincing way, for example, right? Like, how can Islam not be true? Look at what we do, kind of thing. Like as simple as that. Um, I think there's very few people on earth that ever believes because their father told them to believe. Right? I don't think we live in those kind of times anymore. Any questions? Okay, we can do this after the break. Is it a good time to take a break? Yeah? 5:02? Okay, cool. Yes. Okay. Hmm. How do you define it, basically? Yeah. So the way the scholars answer this is that God's power or God's abilities do not apply to rational impossibilities. They only apply to rational possibilities. So it's like saying, can God make 1 + 1 = 3? Stupid question, right? So you cannot bring God's abilities on something that's rationally impossible. See, it's not human rationality. It's rationality in general, right? Certain things are rationally impossible, right? Um, unless that person wants to argue with you constantly, like to the point that, hey, 1 + 1 can be 3, right? They exist. Exactly. So they don't believe logical axioms exist. You can't argue with such a person. You're gonna lose. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So this goes back to whether A, there is a reality, and B, whether we have the ability to discover that reality, right? Unfortunately, people in our times will actually talk about multiple realities, right? So your reality is this, my reality is this, and you're gonna be like, okay, well, what's the real reality? They're like, well, there isn't one. It's just whatever is to you and whatever is to me. So obviously, we don't agree with that worldview at all, right? We believe that there is something called reality, and it exists, and human beings are able to uncover that reality. Because any other way, you kind of it just falls apart. Because then you can't establish anything. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because then you have to go back to like, okay, well, we have a rational mind. We are like, you're not going to ask that question when it comes to scientific hypothesis, right? Exactly. So how does this person live, right? Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So the way we do it is that anything to do with God's abilities or inabilities, it doesn't apply to rational impossibilities. So, yeah. 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 Okay. Yeah. 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 I think you said it. I think you said it well. Yeah. I mean, uh, you can also take them back to like, especially if this person is a believer in science. Science can't hold up if you are going with that belief, right? Yeah. So how do you know these causes are real then, right? So like the whole life falls apart. Okay. Yeah. No, there isn't. There isn't. No. Yeah. It's not worth arguing anymore about. Yeah. No. No. We can't. It doesn't work. Yeah. Yeah. That the impossibility realm, the moment you try to question it, your whole worldview falls apart because not even science doesn't make sense anymore. Like, am I gonna walk home today and take a car? Like, how do I know my car is real? Like, you get my point, right? Yeah, just like that, it is, right? So 1 plus 1 equals 2 is possible. It is the answer. 1 plus 1 equals 10 is never possible as a unit, right? Correct. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll see. I'll see what's. Huh? No, I'll check it out. Yeah. I know the camera wrong, but is this awkward? Sitting? Should I be standing? Huh? Oh, it's there.
Assalamu alaikum. You guys hear me? Anyways, assalamu alaikum, guys. We're gonna begin, inshallah. Yeah, no problem. We're gonna begin. Sorry for yelling at you guys on Zoom.
Right. Bismillah. Who just walked in? Who came after the break or just you? You guys just came. Okay. Do we do a recap or okay. So what's your name? Iman? And you brother? Anil? Anik. Okay. So we were just wrapping up the last discussion with the question, can Allah do anything and everything? Then obviously with the participation, we came to the conclusion that going down that route is a very slippery slope, because the atheist can come and ask, can Allah make a rock so heavy that he himself can't lift? Right? And we talked about how when we talk about Allah's abilities, we say it has to do with logical possibilities, rational possibilities. It cannot apply to rational impossibilities, right? We realize we know certain, we understand certain realities of life, right? And we understand certain limits, and we know, for example, that rational impossibilities can't exist, even in the case of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So a person cannot exist without a volume of space, right? Rationally impossible. 1 + 1 cannot equal 10, rationally impossible. So when someone asks the question of like, can God do something? Can God make something so heavy that he can't lift? We're basically saying, can God ungodify himself, which makes no sense, right? And then the second question we were talking about is if Allah is the doer of all actions. So if we're under the construct that la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, there's no power and might except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and everything that we do, which is seemingly our actions, we're actually bringing causes together. We make intentions. Allah brings the result, right? Now, the question was then, what about evil things? What about people that do evil things? They're bringing together causes or they're making the intention, and Allah gives them the evil result. Who has now done the deed, right? And from the participation and everything, so what we got to was that even if Allah does the bad deed or allows for the bad deed to happen, there's always hikmah. There's no such thing as an absolute bad deed. So even if something is seemingly bad, if there's hikmah behind it, then it's not exactly uh, a bad deed in its absolute, right? Any questions? Okay, cool. Maybe this one again. All right. So now that we're talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we know that he revealed himself through the prophets. Why is he seemingly behind the curtain? Yes. Mhm. Okay. 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 You're basically alluding to the fact that this life is kind of like a test and you figure it out, right? Like, um, okay. Okay. Why? So why? So I think you've answered both of the questions, 1 and 2 here. Does anyone have a different answer? So if someone, I mean, I've spoken to people that have asked me that question, and my answer was like, well, he's not behind the curtain. Right? He has created us. He has given us minds, and he has sent prophets to communicate with us. So how is he behind the curtain, right? And a lot of times, especially with our Christian cousins, what ends up happening is that, like, why doesn't he come down to earth or something, right? Like for them, there's an example that they want to portray. Well, for us, it makes the whole thing again is rationally impossible, because if you have already conceded to the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond time and space and he created time and space, then how can he come within time and space to communicate with his creation? It makes no sense, right? What about like why doesn't he send us clearer signs? Yes. Okay. What needs to be more clear? Okay. Like a sign that makes it absolutely obvious for you that Allah exists and there's no disagreement on earth and everyone goes to them. Yeah. In Surah Al-Baqarah, the story, yeah. Okay. Okay. Go ahead. Clear signs. The fourth one is related to, yeah. Okay. Fair. Yes. Correct. Yeah. 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 Correct. Yeah. Okay. Good point. So Allah says in the Quran, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ولو أننا نزلنا إليهم الملائكة وكلمهم الموتى. If we brought to them angels, to them, to the people, وكلمهم الموتى, and the dead started speaking to them. Okay? Angels come down, dead people start speaking. وحشرنا عليهم كل شيء قبلا, and we resurrect everything that happened before them. Resurrect everybody that lived before them, right? Every being that lived before them to testify, right? So bring the angels down, bring the dead people together, everything that happened before them, testifying of Allah's oneness and of Islam. ما كانوا ما كانوا ليؤمنوا. They will not believe. Right? It's almost as if Allah is saying that if you don't believe with all the signs, it's kind of like exactly what you alluded to. If you don't believe with all the signs that already exist, because they're so out there, they're literally in front of your face, then you're not going to believe anything else. Right? You're not going to believe if the angels come down and dead people are risen up and they're still telling you, right? And you still won't believe. Right? And Allah says, إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ وَلَكِنْ أَكْثَرُهُمْ يَجْهَلُونَ. Except without Allah's will, and most of the people are in jahl, right? They don't know any better. And we know from in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah says, وَإِن كُنتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ مِمَّا نَزَّلْنَا عَلَى عَبْدِنَا. If you are in any doubt about what we have revealed to Muhammad, right? Our slave, our servant, as Allah is describing him, فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِثْلِهِ. Right? Now, the translation we read in Surah Al-Baqarah is what? فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِثْلِهِ is come forth with a surah like it. Right? Mithlihi can also, right? Imam al-Baydawi mentions this in his tafsir. It can, the ha in the end can also mean the Prophet as an abdina. So fa'tu bi suratin min mithlihi means come forth with a surah from someone like him, from amongst your people. Right? So then the challenge is not just about the surah itself, come forth with the surah, but bring forth somebody from amongst you who can come forth with a surah like it. Right? It's a twofold challenge. The surah and to bring someone like the Prophet. Neither of which they even dare to even produce. Right? Okay? Yeah. As for your first question, whether we were fully aware when we were taking the covenant, I don't know, I have to look into that. But in terms of the injustice, like Allah says, He's given us the fitrah, right, which is the ability to recognize the truth, right? He's given us the ability to recognize the truth, but now we have to use that fitrah to seek out the truth, right? Unfortunately, we live in a time where people don't even think it's even a thing, right? We're just kind of living our lives. Does that answer your question? Right. Putting people who will be true ignorant to accept the message in this life. Yeah. Well, if we, just from understanding Allah's justice and Allah's mercy, it would be impossible for us to imagine that we took a covenant which we didn't know. Right? Yeah, it wouldn't make sense. Yeah. From our construct, from our understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it would never make sense. Yeah. And even if you were to say that these people took a covenant, all of us took a covenant that we didn't know what it was, he still gave us the fitrah to now recognize the truth, even if we didn't know what. Like if it was said, right? The whole idea that we took a covenant that we didn't know what we were talking, what was being said is doesn't make any sense. I'm just not saying no to that because I haven't confirmed. I have to look into it. So they didn't use their fitrah, they didn't seek out the truth. Okay, I think we're kind of running out of time, so we'll move a little quicker. So how do we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about himself in the Quran, right? The Prophet informs us about him in the Sunnah. We know he has certain names and attributes, right? But what's the whole point of knowing these names and attributes? What is the purpose of it? Well, we know Allah says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم in the Quran, وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى فَادْعُوهُ بِهَا. That Allah has the best of names and attributes, right? So what's the purpose? What's the point? You call him out through them, right? Those of us from certain basic cultures, parents used to force kids to like memorize the names of Allah, right? But then what ends up happening is this child would grow up, but he would never use them. What was like you have such a powerful tool now. You know all the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? But you're not given the map of like what to do with it. You just memorize it, right? The purpose is to make dua through it, right? To call like we know from the hadith that if someone calls Allah with his Ismul Adam, that is highest name, with his most honorable name, that Allah will respond, right? Now, what is that Ismul Adam? What is that honorable name? Scholars have differed. Like Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani in his, he brings up 14 opinions on what that name is, right? Hey, 14 opinions is not that bad because you can still use 14 names to make dua to reach out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Um, so it is something like we're not, we don't think about this. We don't, like, this is not something that's too difficult, right? It's easier than doing dhikr, right? Sometimes we do so much dhikr, but then we're missing the point in asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, making dua to him, to his name. All right, so there's just a few names that I have screenshotted. Now I took out the meanings because I couldn't find something which was translated in a way, and this is my fault, uh, in a way that I was happy with. Because a lot of times, a name in a meaning, the meaning of a name encompasses so many things that it's almost difficult to encompass that in the English language. How do you explain Ar-Rahman? Right? Like, how do you explain Ar-Rahim in English? You're going to need a definition. It's got to be a sentence. It's not one word, right? But if there's anything to take away from this talk or this lecture today, it's just that, just, you know, when you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're convinced of his existence, you're convinced of Islam. The next step is to now learn about him as much as possible, to call out to him through the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Please, of every. Allah can answer your dua in any time. It doesn't need, you don't need a special moment or a special place, or he can answer your dua anytime if you're sincere, you know, like if your dua is sincere and it's Allah wants to accept it. But we want to increase our probability. We want to do it in a way that has all the beautification and all the things. Like when you're asking, when you're in a job hunt, when you go to a CEO, when you talk to anybody, right? How do you behave, right? You dress nicely. There's a certain way, there's a certain usloob, there's a certain way of talking, right? So what about the Lord of the universe, right? That's the understanding. Yeah, no one can ever say that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Got it. Yeah. Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. Because it adds your understanding and knowledge of Allah to much more than someone who's just randomly calling without knowing the meanings behind it. Because behind the name is also understanding who He is, right? And when you understand, like when you say, Ya Allah, ultuf bina, right? Be soft with us or whatever, right? Irham alayna, like be merciful. When you understand the name Ar-Rahim, then it becomes much more powerful when you use it. Versus someone who doesn't know what Rahim means. And it's similar to reciting Surah Al-Fatiha without knowing what you're saying in Surah Al-Fatiha, right? It's very similar. Yes. Ujalisu Rabbi. Yeah. Yeah. Jazakallah khair. And and just like you were saying, like when I know Allah is Al-Alim, right? Then I'm gonna make dua to Him first before going to the doctor, right? If I have a problem, right? If Allah is the all-knowing, then I know who. Like, I think essentially we all believe in that, but when it comes to our first instinct, right, or first reaction, it's usually not Allah, right? But the goal is to make that first instinct of you running to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before you run to anybody in mankind or creation, right? Uh, Similarly, when I know al-afu means someone who forgives very often, right? Then I'm more likely to ask for istighfar, right? I know Allah is al-ghafur, but that element of al-afu adds a different complementary meaning to it, right? Which means that I don't have to wait for a special moment or at the end of the night to ask for forgiveness. I can ask for forgiveness anytime. Like it just prepares you for a different psyche that it wouldn't prepare you otherwise. Yeah, yeah. I mean, one thing that comes to my mind is when and a person has sinned so much that that basically they feel that now I've sinned so much I can't pray, or now I've sinned so much, how will Allah forgive me? And you can directly connect that to not understanding the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So not understanding is Allah is Al-Ghafur, Al-Afu, right? I have a friend, and he's not going to listen to this lecture, so I know for sure he's not going to be singled out. I have a high school friend who was hanging out with the bad people, let's just say, right? The wrong crowd. And I met him for iftar. This is not too long ago, maybe 10 years ago. And I was a high school friend, right? And he was like, hey, so that day wasn't gonna work for me, but he's like, hey, listen, I'll drop you to the mosque in Tarawih afterwards. Okay, cool, we'll do that. I met him, he wasn't fasting, and then after iftar, he dropped me to the mosque, and I'm like, are you coming? He's like, no. He's like, no, I'm just too far. Like, I can't do this, right? It's obviously it's from shaitan, but this understanding that you've gone so far that you can't even walk into a mosque anymore. You like it's obviously coming from a place of guilt, right? He feels so ashamed of himself that he's like, I'm too far now. I'm not gonna go. And I couldn't even convince him to come at the end of the day, right? But subhanallah, it's like, did you not know Allah is al-Afu? Did you not know Allah is al-Ghafur? Right? Did you not know that Allah is more merciful than your own mother? Right? Many, many times more merciful than your own mother, right? It's just a lack of understanding. This is jahl at the end of the day. And is this the last part? Yes, it is. So, what does it mean to know your Lord? What does it mean to know our Lord? If I know Allah and I accept Allah is the Lord of the universe, and I accept that Islam is probably true, right? This happens in our own extended family members a lot, right? Like, yeah, I'm convinced Islam is the truth. Is that enough? What do you think? Anik? No? Why not? I can't hear you. It's the bare minimum? Is it the bare minimum though? So if who knows Jordan Peterson? So if Jordan Peterson tomorrow publishes a video and he says, yeah, Islam is the true religion, and Prophet Muhammad was a true prophet, but he doesn't become Muslim. He doesn't say anywhere that he's Muslim. Like, is that enough? But he just accepted. No? He did it? Yes. So what's the missing element? Anybody from that side? Yes. Submission. The scholars say id'an, that you have to submit, right? Otherwise, Iblis knows Iblis, does Iblis not know Allah? Does he know Allah better than us? He doesn't? Probably does, right? He's known him longer than all of us combined, right? And he knew him enough to be promoted with the angels, right? But what's the missing element? He never submitted, right? So Idan is the main thing. And then the first question, can there be multiple paths to reach to him, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He said no, okay. Salvation. Then there's only one, okay. No one believes otherwise. Okay, good. We're doing well. There are people in our times that believe otherwise. Even Muslims. Yeah. So there are Muslims. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you names here, but I wouldn't want them to. I wouldn't want you to YouTube them. But there are people who believe that Christians and Jews and Muslims they can all reach salvation as long as they are in one of these three religions. But yeah, anyways, that's a separate thing. So can I accept Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do nothing and be fine? So let's say the first one was I didn't submit, right? So now we covered that one. So let's say someone submits, doesn't do anything, believes. What happens to that? Yes. Okay. Okay. But what happens to someone who doesn't do it? Is he doomed to hellfire forever and there's no hope for him? Or? Yes. I mean, this person is living a life of contradiction. Okay, he doesn't want to. Udkhulu fi silmi kafa. Come to this deen, like in wholesomeness, like in fullness. Okay, of course. Yeah. So let's say the person definitely had belief, definitely had iman, but never prayed in their life. Very, very. I mean, I'm giving you a very extreme situation. Like, there's how many people do you know that's like that? Like, never prayed in their life, but they have iman and they believe, right? There were people like that in the past. Yes, there were Sahabas who became Muslim, and then they were on an expedition, so they joined the expedition and they died. So they died without having prayed a single salah, right? But that's not the case we're talking about here, because we're talking about someone in our times who believes Islam is the true religion, but he's just lazy. He doesn't do anything, doesn't pray, doesn't pay zakat, doesn't do hajj. Obviously, never did hajj, doesn't fast, is bad to his wife and kids, is bad to his parents. Let's just add every single bad thing that we can in this list. LGBTQ, whatever, like fill it, right? But he believes in Islam being the truth. And he has submission in the sense that he says, I'm Muslim. So he doesn't do Amin Salih, obviously. So is he doomed to hellfire forever? Okay, so not forever. Correct. So whoever said La ilaha illallah in this world, they will be taken out of hellfire eventually. Whoever had Iman in the slightest bit, they'll be taken out eventually. Uh, so the takeaway here is that um, even though we live in interesting times, right, we have work to do. Like Prophet says, Deen nasiha, right? The religion is sincere advice, right? If we're living in complicated times, that means it's time to raise ourselves up and be active in the lives of the people that need us. And with that, I'll finish this. Yes. Define a hypocrite. Yeah. Is that the definition of hypocrite though? So I'll give you an example. Upshur tells me, if you come to UTM, I'll be there. And he doesn't show up. And I tell him, man, you're a hypocrite. Is he a hypocrite? So from a language perspective, from an English language perspective, yes. Right? Because the way we understand the word hypocrite in English is someone who contradicts themselves. Correct? But what you're asking is about a munafiq. Right? You're asking if the person who has something different in his heart and he does something else, like is this nifaq? Right? Hypocrisy from an English perspective, I'm sure a lot of us do things which are hypocritical, but doesn't mean we're munafiq, so we have nifaq, right? I shouldn't have my doctor said, for example, I'm just making this up by the way. Let's say my doctor said, don't have any more sugar. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not gonna have any more sugar. And I just come home and have like cheesecake. Right? And I fill my life with sugar even like more than before. I'm a hypocrite, right? I'm living a hypocritical situation here, but it's not anything to do with nifaq or not a munafiq. Does that answer your question? The linguistic, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I mean, again, look, when I was young, it was the case. Like we would throw the word hypocrite like left, right, and center, like, right? But it doesn't quite translate to munafiq, and munafiq doesn't translate to hypocrite properly. There's a big gap that they're unrelated, and there's a little bit of space where they're related, right? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I think dhikr, daily afkar, the ones that were prescribed by the Prophet ﷺ is a huge thing, and it's a huge protection for us on a regular basis. Even when, I mean, look at how much time it takes you walking from one building to another. You can literally fit in so much just from one walk, right? So fill your lives with dhikr. Never miss your salah. Never miss your salah. Like, we have people in Europe, we have our brothers and sisters in France who are literally fighting on edge with the civil battles to wear the hijab, to wear the abaya, to wear the niqab, for brothers to not be discriminated, and we don't have that here, right? So like, what's our excuse? There isn't. And the third thing I would say is that everything you do can be ibadah, right? Prophet said your sleep can be ibadah too, right? Your sleep can be ibadah. So the fact that you're coming to university, if you make the right intentions, this can be ibadah too, right? If you're in chemistry, what can you add to the lives of Muslims down the road? What contribution can you make, right? And if you make it with the right intention, everything you're doing in university till that point is ibadah, right? So increase the awareness of of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Even in the non-Muslim world, being self-aware is like the hippie thing to do, isn't it? Being self-aware, being more aware, having awareness. You read it in like all self-help books, right? And it's like the Prophet ﷺ taught us this like 1400 years ago. How do you learn about who Allah is? Read the Quran more, right? Moving forward, read the Quran more. Learn more about His names and attributes. Like I said, when we translate the names and attributes to one word, we it is really sad because it doesn't translate, right? Ar-Rahim. How are you going to translate Ar-Rahim to English? Merciful. Okay, what about Ar-Rahman? Also merciful. There's a difference, right? One is for mankind, one is for specifically Muslims, right? How do you capture that in one word in English? It doesn't translate, right? So to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have to know his names and attributes. You have to know his Prophet so, right? So you can learn the religion. Does that answer your question? I'll leave that. No comment. Okay. Yes. Yeah. I'll show it to you. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I don't recommend that at all.